Okay, guys, let's get started. This university fucked it up once more, so microphones are not working. I hope you can hear me. There's some technical folks on the way, but I want to get started nevertheless. So with today's lecture about success breeds success dynamics. First of all, let me remind you, there's no lecture on Friday. So no lecture on Friday. So after this lecture, the next one is next Tuesday. No lecture on Friday. Okay, then you guys, you had the first take-home test. How exciting was that? 72 hours of fun over the weekend. You know, I was glad because actually I could see, I see all those things, who's taking the test when and what your score is and all these kind of things. So I see all of these things. And especially talking about success today, I thought it's actually very nice. So let me mention 3 people who scored full points here, 200 points. So a round of applause for Constance, Andrew, and Tom. Yeah, I think that's great. 200 points. We had a few other people who had 190 points out of 200 points. So Nicole, Lydia, Helen, and Molly. I think it's great. Well done. And then some other people with lower scores. Overall, I was very satisfied with this. And I don't know. From a pedagogical point of view, I think it really helped you to go through the readings and force you to stay on top of things. So I think after this trial, I'm going to keep using this kind of format in my future lectures. Yeah. Okay, so talking about success, actually this really fits in nicely. So today we'll talk about success as well, or in the literature it's also called the Matthew effect. Yeah, maybe you heard about that before. And it essentially looks at what do people do who are successful. Yeah. And I think that's a very useful question. So I think about that, because I want to tell you that, and I want you that we all learn from that. Hang on a second. Yeah. So none of these microphones are working.
The real one is actually it's broken. We're just waiting for him to be replaced.
Well, the left one. There's nothing to.
Yeah, man, we just have a quick look.
Okay, now something's happening. So what's the problem?
Just the knob here was all the way down.
Okay, good to know. Well, thanks.
That should be plenty, yeah?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's good. Thanks. Okay, back to business. So, about success. So what do people do who are successful? And I like to think about that, not just because I think it helps to think about that, because I also want to tell you about what you can do to be successful, not just in this course, but at university in general or in life, And so what do we know about success? And it's actually a very interesting field of study in sociology as well. Yeah? And, just a little slide about what people think, how it looks like, what it actually is. So often there's actually a lot of hard work involved in that. Another quote from one of my favorite philosophers of all time. I used to play a lot of basketball when I was a teenager, so Michael Jordan was one of my heroes. And he says, I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Yeah? So working on it, winners stray, losers complain. And that's sort of like one of those ideas that we have about how success comes about. So today I'm going to put a slightly different spin onto that. Yeah? So and how success can come about by having success already. Yeah? So that's sort of which then nicely fits with this overall theme of this lecture, where we talk about these kind of dynamics. So let's get started. So these are sort of like the conventional wisdoms we have about success. Yeah? So now let me start with 2 observations that kind of challenge that a little bit, and then some crazy sports examples, and then Matthew effects, and then I brought some field experiments with me, which is basically the reading that you had for today. Okay, so people who looked at success, they made 2 observations that are sort of struck them a little bit, like something that is a little odd, and probably this is something that you've seen yourself as well, in many different cases, that most most of us have little success, while a few have a lot of success. Yeah? So it's very unequally distributed. Some people are superstars. I don't know, in music, I don't know. Some people are YouTube heroes for whatever reason, right? And some people just suddenly have a huge amount of success. Yeah? And then you wonder what is so different to those people. And actually, here the story is that there's not much difference in that. Yeah? That because they are successful, they tend to become even more successful. Yeah? And when you look at that, people looked at that. So how is success distributed over a population? And then they see or they found what we call a power law distribution. This is like a name, and you find these kind of distributions in many different settings. And whenever you find these kind of distributions, people are a little cautious and think, hang on a moment, maybe there's something at play here, a more general mechanism, some dynamic that we know from other settings. A power law distribution basically means, on the one axis you have the total number of people, on the other axis you have their performance, and basically it tells you that a few people, a small number of people have incredibly high success. They perform very high, while most people have lower success. Yeah? So that's sort of how you read that graph. It's not like there's something in the mean and there we go and everybody is sort of normally distributed around that in a way, but it's more like a distribution like this. Yeah? So only a few people that score very high, and then lots of people that score very low. Yeah? That's what we call a power law distribution. And in these kind of distributions, people who study, complex systems or these kind of dynamics, they're always very eager to look at these kind of distributions because they give you an indication for an underlying dynamic at play. But coming back to some people being more successful than others, like a classical explanation would be that some people are just more special than others. Yeah? There's something about certain people. Yeah? They have certain talents, and that sort of differentiates them from, being a winner compared to being a loser. Yeah? That's sort of like, you could say, okay, well, maybe that's a reasonable explanation. Yeah? That some people just have certain talents, and they just can do certain things, while other people can't do that. However, there is a huge distribution, like why are some people so incredibly successful compared to most other people? Yeah? Another observation that people made while looking and studying success is that there seems to be an acceleration in how successful people are. Yeah? So oftentimes this means that something really kicks off. Yeah? Like people are sort of okay, yeah? They're sort of like, equally bad YouTubers like you are, but then for whatever reason, bang, they really take it off, right? And they become super, super successful. Yeah? And so suddenly there's some explosion in here. Yeah? It's like a fast acceleration in this. And that's sort of what we empirically observe. Again, you could come along and say, okay, well, there could be a perfectly reasonable explanation for this. Maybe it is, there's something like a learning curve, and maybe there's something over time that kind of makes that success accelerate faster. Right? But these kind of explanations are a little unsatisfying. You need to make a lot of assumptions here, like why suddenly some people are so special compared to others, or how can that explain this huge difference? Yeah? Why is there suddenly this increase in success that it really kind of kicks off very quickly? So, and this is sort of now where this lecture comes in, because when you think about social dynamics as a potential driver for this, it becomes a much easier, much simpler explanation. Okay, so these are these two observations that people made about success in general, and that made them think about, hang on, maybe there are dynamic processes underlying this. Yeah? Maybe there's something that some people are successful, and because of that they become even more successful, and so on. Okay. So now let me talk about something else. I call this crazy sports. This is another example, and then maybe we're kind of getting closer towards what we call the Matthew effect. Crazy sports, this is now an example that I'm using from a book written by Malcolm Gladwell. Maybe you came across this guy. He's one of those guys who writes these books that you pick up at the airport. Yeah, he wrote a whole bunch of books. One is called here Outliers: The Story of Success, which is a really nice read. You just read that very easily. There's a lot of stories in there. He wrote other books about tipping points. We get some more from that later on. He's a journalist, but he still builds on the existing research. So he kind of makes the references to the solid research that you can read up later on. So I think it's a great read, especially if you like these kind of things. So basically, he writes about this episode, where he went to visit this hockey game, ice hockey in Canada, between the Vancouver Giants and the Medicine-Hat Tigers. Basically, these were high school teams playing against each other. It's a big thing in Canada. Hockey is hugely popular in a way, and that's sort of the national cup final for those high school league in Canada, the Canadian Hockey League. And there was sort of this final in May 2007, and so he watched that, or he actually refers to this guy who watched that. And then when you go there and you basically get a little leaflets, a little program about the play, about the teams and so on. And this is sort of how this looked like. Yeah, this is basically now the team roster of the Medicine-Hat Tigers. Yeah? So there you see the name of the players, you see their positions. They're certain, central, whatever, left-handed, right-handed, height, weight, birth date, and where they come from. So this is sort of like this team roster. So now I'm going to do a little exercise with you guys. We have a little exercise. So what I want you to do now is, with a person next to you, I want you to take 2 minutes and have a close look at this team roster. Yeah, have a close look at this team roster and think about whether you notice something unusual. Yeah? Okay, so I give you 2 minutes to have a look at this. Okay, guys, how are we doing? Did anybody notice anything unusual here? Yeah?
There's like a lot of left-handed people on the team.
A lot of left-handed people on the team. Okay, that's an interesting point. Somebody else? Something else? Yeah?
Majority of people are born in the first half of the year.
A lot of people were born in the first half of the year. Look at the birth dates here. Yeah. Look at the birth dates. This is sort of now, you see the year as well, but also the months. And now I'm going to use exactly that data, and I'm going to make a little graph of this. This is sort of how it looks like when I split it up into quarters of the year. Right? So almost half of the players were born in the first 3 months of the year. What? Yeah? What the hell is going on here? Yeah? Well, the thing is, notice they were born in different years, right? So some of them were born in 1990, others in 89, others were born in, 86, 87. So it's actually different years. But still, half of them were born in the first 3 months of the year. And this is actually not a fluke. Actually, people did lots of studies on these kind of things. And this is now data from all players in the Canadian, I can't remember if this now is in the NHL. It might have been at the NHL, the National Hockey League. Yeah. And then you see kind of a similar thing. Well, first of all, you see now bars that tell you what you would expect to see. Yeah? How is that calculated? Well, it's basically like, well, if you take the number of people who were born in a year, right, and you look at the percentage of how many people were born in a year, in general, in the general population, then a certain fraction of people should move on to become hockey players, right? And there should be no reason to believe why some people in January should be more likely to move on and become professional hockey players than people who were born, let's say, in October or so. Yeah? So you see the observed values, and you see the actual number of players in the NHL and when they were born. Yeah? And you see hardly any of those players was born in the last quarter of the year, from October to December. So this definitely is no fluke. So people did some other studies on this. There's another paper that I have now from Plus One, where they looked at the draft of the NHL. It's basically when they kind of recruit new players that come from the university into the professional hockey league, and they looked at the people that were drafted. It's basically just new players, new cohorts of players coming in to the team, and they looked at when they were born. And again, you see now you have data over the years. This seems to be a very consistent thing for the last 30 years. Yeah? That 40% of the players were born in the first quarter, while only around 15% of the players were born in the fourth quarter. That's very odd. Yeah? This is a puzzle. This is actually a great puzzle. Yeah? I talked about puzzles before. This is a great puzzle. It's really odd, yeah? But there's really something behind this here. Yeah? And the question is there something about being born at the beginning of the year that makes people better at hockey? There's no reason to believe that. Yeah? Why should somebody who's born in January, I don't know, they were born in the winter months, why should they be better hockey players? There's no reason. Yeah? There's absolutely no reason. Well, now I'm going to give you an explanation for this. So how does this work? Well, basically, in Canada, hockey is a huge thing for little kids already. They start playing at a very early age. And what they do have, they have cut-off birth dates for tryouts. Right? So basically you play in one team or you play in the other team, in the higher team or in the higher team and so on, right, if you're older. And the cut-off point is basically the period is 1st of January until 31st of December. So when you're born within that period of a particular year, you're playing with that age cohort. Right? So if you were born, let's say, at the 1st of January, you mostly play with other individuals in the team and in the league and so on who are slightly younger than you. Right? They are sort of within that year, but you're sort of in that year at the very beginning. While when you were born in December around Christmas, you're sort of one of those unlucky bastards that kind of has to play all those physical dudes who were born up to a year earlier than you. Yeah? So maybe you remember that, I don't know how this works in Ireland, but in Germany where I grew up, we had kind of a similar thing for, there was a sport competition every year. And depending on your birth year, you got certain points for getting a medal or not. Yeah? And because I was born at a different year than some people were in my classroom, right? I always needed fewer points to get the medal. Yeah? Because the cutoff point there at the school year was actually from July until June. That was sort of put us all together. So some people were born in, let's say in 1980, in 1981, or 1981, or 1982, and so on. Yeah. While then the actual cutoff points for those points were sort of on an annual basis. Yeah. Okay, so that's sort of how it goes here. But now think about it. When those kids are 5 years old, 4 years old, 1 year difference is huge. Yeah? So this means like a huge physical difference. So this 1 year really, really, really matters when they are very young, or this up to a year. That doesn't mean that there has to be a whole year, right? I don't know, they sometimes, let's say you were born in January, then some of your competitors were born in June, yeah? Or some of your competitors were born in October or so on, but hardly any of them was born December or June of the previous year, right? Because you're all grouped together according to the calendar year. So this is sort of how it goes here. And 1 year's difference makes a huge difference in a child's ability and strength on the sports. So this is sort of like the starting point. And now we could still argue, hang on, if those guys are 20 years old, or or sometimes a little younger when they start getting drafted to the NHL, this half year shouldn't matter anymore. Yeah? Those guys are all physically fit. Yeah? When you're 20 years old, there are hardly any physical differences between you and somebody who was born half a year earlier anymore. Yeah. However, now one of those dynamics kicks in, because what's happening? Well, bigger kids, so let's say you were born in January, will play better and are then, well, basically just because at the very early stage of their life, this half year really matters, or this few months being born earlier really matters. It really transcends into physicality at that stage. And so they will shine, right? Because most of their competitors, the people they play with, are younger. So they will shine. So when they are scouts, and they start scouting very early on in Canada for professional hockey players. So when scouts go around, you will just look much better when you sort of happen to play with younger kids and we happen to play with kids who are up to a year older than you. So you will be seen as better. And then people will select you, scouts will select you, and they will put you into more competitive teams. You will get better coaches, you will get better exercises, you will practice in a better way because you are one of the best amongst your cohorts. Yeah, right. So, and this is sort of now where those initial differences that were bestowed on people just for, having been born earlier or a little later, multiply. Yeah, so they start multiplying. So these effects really, really matter. They don't go away. Why? Because there's sort of these dynamics that kind of keep them alive. Yeah? Because then there's a selection mechanism here. Yeah? Because then you're playing good. That means kind of you have a higher chance to get into the special team. Yeah? And in the special team, so more people that were born earlier during the year, because they're more physical at that stage compared to the other people, they sort of get selected to go into the special team. And in the special team, they get special trainers, special coaches, better equipment, and so on. Yeah? So this is sort of where those initial differences multiply. And finally, you find it in other sports too. Yeah? So in basketball, but as here's actually a graph for other sports. You find it for soccer, you find it for hockey, you find it for rugby. Again, now this is sort of split up into thirds of the year, but what you would expect, what your intuition tells you, actually there is no reason why somebody born at a later year should be more successful later on or should make it into one of those professional sports leagues later on. So you would expect like a cut of thirds, where every third of the year has an equal chance of produce professional sports players, but it doesn't. Yeah. So you see, actually, most people in all of those leagues over, in the Canadian junior champions or in the junior soccer, it's almost 3/4 of the players who were born in the first 3 months of the year. Yeah. So that's a little crazy. Yeah. And actually, we do find this with academic performances too. Yeah. So people looked at that. So when you are, let's say, at a young age, and it's crazy to think about it, but it really matters. So let's say, somebody gets sent to school at age 5 and somebody gets sent to school at age 6, yeah, which is sort of like the normal age or whatnot. Yeah. So there is, at that stage, there are differences in cognitive abilities in kids, right? Not always, but often they are, right? And then if you buy into these dynamics that I'm presenting you here, you see that then kids might have less opportunities to participate in the class, right? Because they have a slight disadvantage to begin with. Then the teacher spends more time on the good students, right? Which makes them even better and leaves other people behind. So these differences can actually multiply and they can persist in life. And that's exactly what we call the Matthew effect. So the Matthew effect is basically, it comes from, it's also called the Monopoly effect. If you ever played Monopoly, you understand this, because Monopoly, as soon as you kind of own the right streets and hotels, basically you can keep playing for it for a while, but it's not going to change. So the rich will get richer, just because they already possess something to begin with. It's called the Matthew effect because of the Bible. There's like the Gospel, St. Matthew, for unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance, but from him that hath shall not be taken away, even that which he hath. So basically, there are different names for these kind of things, called cumulative advantage, path-dependent increasing returns, first mover advantage, whatnot, monopoly effect, success breeds success. These are all sort of different names for the same thing. Yeah? for the same thing, which is fascinating. That something kind of there can be more success because people already have success. Yeah? So it's a bit like, I don't know, think about, I had musicians at the very onset of this. Some people just for whatever reason, they have a song, gets ranked high, and then other people see it, they click on it, and then they kind of gets ranked even higher. Right? Even though it might have been only slightly different at the beginning, or slightly better at the beginning. Which is another reason why you should always give your best, because these small differences really, really matter. You sometimes think there's a huge difference between, successful people and not successful people. But in my experience, there hardly is. So I met a lot of very successful people in the academic business, and they don't do anything different than what we do or what you guys can do. I think you can do exactly the same thing. For whatever reason, effects just multiply. Okay, so and here comes one of those guys that kind of we see a lot. Not only did he introduce self-fulfilling prophecies to the literature, but also the Matthew effect. Again, we have Robert K. Merton, and he had this paper. It was in the further readings section for today, where he looked at the Matthew effect in science. So basically in, academics, people like me. And there he says that the Matthew effect consists in the accruing of greater increments of recognition for particular scientific contributions to scientists of considerable repute, and the withholding of such recognition from scientists who have not yet made their mark. So basically some people who are already seen as having a reputation, people listen to these people even more, right? And then sort of these things multiply. And actually he looks at this in the context of Nobel Prize winners. One of the worst things that can happen to you as an academic is to win the Nobel Prize. Because if you do, people think that everything you're going to say is going to be super important. You cannot say any bullshit after that anymore. Because people really jump on what you say. Because they think that because you got the Nobel Prize, everything you say must be great. Well, of course, there's kind of a higher chance that, you are an intelligent person when you get the Nobel Prize. But what we see, and actually there are studies about that, about how people cite Nobel Prize winners. As soon as they got the Nobel Prize, they really get cited even more after that. Much more than they should, if it is just a normal successful work that they did. So this is on the Nobel Prize. I have some funny stories about the Nobel Prize, but maybe I'll tell you about that another day. Well, I once met, I met two Nobel Prize winners. Once I met Thomas Schelling. We have him here a few times. He's actually an important figure in our context. We come back to him in the context of segregation. He won the Nobel Prize in economics for actually his work, his game theoretical work on the Cold War. But now he's very old. He's like, 85, 90 years old. So I was standing next to him, and I had a cold. And I felt, I wanted to chat with this guy, but I felt like every moment I'm coughing. I might infect this guy and he might die. So I sort of was standing there and I felt, hopefully I won't kill Thomas Schelling. So I think he's still alive. So the cold wasn't that deadly to begin with. But I have some other Thomas Schelling stories. Maybe another time I'll tell you some. Merton looks at this in the context of science, and we do find this in science. So there's now a quote from a guy, Medoff, who looked at this, where do people come from? What is the home institution of people who write academic articles, and how successful are these articles? And then he finds that if, in this case it is about economists, when an economist is affiliated with Harvard or with the University of Chicago, which are undoubtedly two of the best economics departments in the world, or universities in general, in sociology they are pretty good too. And what they found is that if somebody has an affiliation with these universities, people read that work more, right? Or people cite that work more. Just because this person is from that university, regardless of how good that is. And actually, you see that. Actually, I observed this firsthand. When I went to conferences, I was a student a bit like you, but I happened to do my PhD in Oxford. And I was at this conference, and I went there, and people see your name and your affiliation and so on. And suddenly there were all those people in the fucking room. I was a fucking nobody. Nobody really knew me, but all they saw was sort of the affiliation. And then people go and think, okay, this must be a great guy. I don't know. Even though that might not necessarily be the case. So sort of a signal like that can lead to getting more success afterwards. So in the academic business, this is actually well documented. But even in real life, you've seen that. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Yeah? And that's the dynamic we are talking about here. So people realize that Merton introduced this in the context of science and scientific success, but people realize that this Matthew effect is a much more general mechanism. It's a much more general mechanism that actually drives a lot of things in our social life. So a lot of inequalities across any temporal process, in which a relative favorable position becomes a resource that produces even more relative gains. So just because somebody already has something, they're even more likely to get even more. Okay, so that's what we call the Matthew effect, or the rich get richer effect. So now I have the reading that you guys had for today. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, because there they actually try to use that and see if one can actually artificially make things successful. Yeah. I think it's a beautiful design. There's fascinating stuff about these dynamics here. And it's a guy who I really admire. So it's this paper, Arnoud van der Rooijt, he with some colleagues now did these field experiments on success breeds success dynamics. So the idea they had in this paper was, okay, maybe the success breeds success hypothesis claims that the ultimate success of select persons may be born out of the small random initial advantages that grow ever larger through one-way positive feedback. And it's basically like positive feedback loops. And then the idea is, if for whatever reason there's a small difference at the beginning, which could be because people were born a few months earlier, or maybe it's just completely random. Maybe it's just really completely random. That for whatever reason you write a song and somebody listens to that song who happens to be a producer. And because of that, suddenly now you get the attention, suddenly you get an initial success, a slightly little more, and that then can multiply, that then can kick off. Okay, and we see that in many domains, like music. I don't know, I had the politics example as well. You see Bush Senior and Bush Junior. I had another. It would have been even better if then Jeb Bush would have been the Republican candidate, but he didn't make it. But so the question they had in this paper: can we artificially trigger these kind of dynamics? Can one increase the likelihood of success in the future by bestowing success upon an individual in the present? So what they try to do is to artificially give some people or some initiatives success at the beginning, and then they wanted to know if that initial recognition or success that they bestowed upon that, you'll see in a second what that actually means, if that kind of then led to those initiatives or people becoming even more successful afterwards. Sounds a little crazy if it works, but actually it does work. So how did they do that? Well, they looked at, it's a very innovative research design, but at the same time very straightforward. So they looked at a bunch of different websites. One of them is called Kickstarter. Do you guys know Kickstarter? Yeah, you know Kickstarter? It's basically like this website where let's say you have an idea, let's say you want to produce a new lunchbox, and you say, I need to have capital for that. I need to have, let's say, I don't know, $10,000, or actually here it says that $25,000 they need to produce that thing. And then you can basically ask people in the internet to support you with that, to basically like to microfinance your initial call for capital. And when you reach that, then the people who initially pledged to you, they get a better deal when the product finally gets produced and so on. It's basically a website, you can check it out, Kickstarter, people who have products, idea for products, to get money, to get potential investors. But now we're talking about very small sums, so like you and me, we could just go there and we could say, oh, this is a fantastic idea. I always wanted to have a cool lunchbox. Somebody should develop that. So let me pledge, I don't know, $20 or 20 euros for that. And when it then actually gets produced, when it actually reaches the minimum number, then I would get it at the end of the day. So that's sort of like a website, Kickstarter for that. So they went to this website, and maybe you see where this is going. They kind of took some projects that just had started, so nobody had donated any, or nobody had given any money to that yet, but then they artificially gave money to it. It's just a random product, and they gave money to it. And then at the end, they wanted to know if this product then became more successful at the end. So what do we mean by successful is that, well, here you see how many other people already pledged. Here in this case, you see when I checked this, over 8,000 people said, oh, this is a great idea, I should give money for this new lunchbox. And you see the total amount that came together. Yeah. And now the idea is, if a lot of other people already say that this could be a great idea or great product, the idea is that this makes me more likely to give money than to it as well. Yeah. And then, their point was to maybe we can kickstart that off by giving initial money at the beginning to give people this false impression that other people think that this is a great product, while in fact it's completely random, and then to see if it takes off. So that's Kickstarter, but I come back to that. They also did 3 other experiments. Often you see that, and this is sort of the good papers, they kind of find a very general mechanism and they kind of look at it in very different settings. Yeah? Then it's very convincing that whatever you find is not just due to this particular setting. Yeah? So they also looked at other things. So they looked at a website called eOpinions, which is basically an online opinion website. It's a bit like Amazon, when you can rate a product afterwards, or you can rate a seller afterwards, give stars, and then say something about that product, pros and cons. Yeah. They used Wikipedia as a website where basically people edit Wikipedia. You know how Wikipedia works, and then actually in the background, when you are a very active editor on Wikipedia, you can get a reward from other people. Yeah, then you can say, oh, you're a great Wikipedia editor, and you get an award. And the last website where they looked at these kind of things is change.org, which is a platform for online petitions. So everybody, you can put an online petition up there and try to find support for that. So this is sort of like a petition where some people said, okay, M&Ms, they should get rid of artificial colors. Yeah. And then you can go in and say, yes, I support that. Actually, in this case, over 200,000 people already supported that idea. Yeah. It's like an online petition. Okay, so now, but let me go to what they actually did. So I talked a little more about Kickstarter to begin with. So let's use that as an example, because here what they did, they kind of took a random campaign, a random Kickstarter campaign that had just started, so nobody had donated anything to it yet. Yeah? And they didn't even look at whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. Yeah? Just pure chance, half of them got assigned to the treatment group, and half of them got assigned to the control group. So now, whenever a project was assigned to the treatment group, they kind of gave money to that project at the very beginning, and actually a significant amount, like up to 10% of the value of what they wanted to have. But I think it was up to 100 euros, so it was actually a small amount. Yeah? So it's actually not that expensive, that research. But they gave money to it. So it looked like, for other people, okay, somebody liked that product. It must be a good product. With eOpinions, they did a similar thing. They kind of channeled products into 2 groups, treatment and control. And in the treatment, so actually in this case, both reviews were considered from expert as not helpful. So somebody wrote a review on it, and then expert said, okay, this is really not helpful. And then half of them, they actually gave a not helpful rating, while the other half, they didn't. And then the idea is, do those opinions or those ratings where that receive this this rating that it's bad, yeah, do they get even worse after that? Yeah? Similar with Wikipedia or with the change.org. Here the idea was, again, they kind of took some random petitions that had just started, and then they kind of put artificial signatures to it at the beginning, with the idea, do those initial signatures, do they multiply? Yeah. Does it mean that then others sign for it because they see that others already signed for it? Yeah. Okay. And this is sort of what they found. At the end, it's very straightforward. So that's sort of why I gave you that reading, because you can understand these kind of things, even without any fancy, methods behind it, in a way. Because at the end, you get a simple graph like this, for all of those 4 settings, funding, ratings, awards, and signatures. And you have the control group, and then you have the experiment, or the treatment group. And there you see how successful those things ended up at the end of the day. Of course, you can read up in the paper how they measured success and so on, right? And what you see is that in those treatment groups, whenever they artificially bestowed success on something, either a Kickstarter campaign or a rating or some awards on Wikipedia or online petitions, those things became more successful afterwards. Yeah? While in the control group, they didn't have that. So the only difference between the control and the treatment group here was that they artificially bestowed success upon those things in the treatment group. And there's another graph where you can see that actually how it really matters. This is now over time, average success. You have like solid lines and dotted lines. This is basically a graph from the paper that you read for today. And when you compare the colored lines with basically the solid with the dotted line, you see the difference in success over time. Yeah, and the solid lines are the ones in the treatment group, while the dotted lines are the ones in the control group, where they didn't bestow success upon those things in the first instance. And actually, for Kickstarter, they even kind of found that for every dollar that they kind of invested initially into a Kickstarter project, at the end of the day, there were more people investing into that of $1.15. So it really paid to give away money at the beginning, because that kind of made then other people donate more than you would have gotten without that initial dollar. Right? So they find very nice evidence for success breeds success in a variety of substantive domains. Strategic actors can effectively invest in positive feedback, and this is a completely new field. This is now a paper which is 2.5 years old. As you can imagine, marketing folks, they jump on this, because this is kind of crazy that you can actually make something more successful by making it look successful to begin with. Yeah. So it reverses a little bit the cause and effect here. Yeah. And governments may use that as well to jumpstart certain campaigns. So I had a little bit of exercise, but unfortunately we are running out of time. So maybe you can think about that while we don't see each other on Friday, and we see each other again next week on Tuesday, and that's the reading for next week. Yeah? Okay, thanks very much.